This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Hello, everybody. I think we can begin now. I'm Izabella Kaminska. I am the relatively still new finance editor at POLITICO Europe. Thank you so much for joining us today. And what a week, right? What a month. Who knew? I didn't know when I joined POLITICO that the organization was gifted with foresight of this amazing magnitude that they were able to predict that this would be the best month ever to have a finance summit. So here we are, looking ahead to what is in store for the financial system of Europe, really. We've got everything from bank crises to the collapse of banks in actual fact, fintech, talk about stablecoins, fiscal union, banking union back on the agenda again. So really, it's going to be a jam-packed session and day. But I also wanted to thank everybody who's here in person. Special commendation for you all, because you made it through the barricades of the rubbish. I always wondered what Paris would be like in the days of Victor Hugo, and now I know. So that's great. And also, a big thank you to our sponsors, who are, Circle, the leading partner, comes courtesy of the Federal Deposit and Insurance Corporation, which is great. Thank you to the US. That was a joke because of a stablecoin debacle. But anyway, our other presenting partners are Generali and MasterCard. I've been asked to remind you all that this is an interactive summit. So you can ask questions through the swap card platform. And if you are in the room, and again, special commendation if you are, you can scan the QR code on the screens. Otherwise, the instructions for which you can find on the event website. If you're already on the platform, feel free to chat with fellow attendees and ask questions in the box to the right of the screen if you're on a desktop. And below the live stream if you are viewing on your mobile. And some sessions naturally will have in-life, person-to-person Q&As. And if you are the sort of person who likes to tweet a lot, and hopefully some of you are, feel free to go crazy on Twitter with the hashtag PoliticoFinance. So yes, I'm going to, I think everyone is now settling in. So without further ado, I think, I will invite my colleague Paola Tamma to come up on stage for our first interview with Commissioner, and another, I mean, this is quite extraordinary to have a Paola interviewing a Paolo Gentiloni. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Izzy. Thank you so much. My name is Paola. I'm a pro reporter at Politico. I cover the EU economy, and I'm joined online by Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, who is Commissioner for the Economy and a former Prime Minister of Italy. Am I joined online?
Good morning, buongiorno, bonjour.
Buongiorno. We still cannot see you, but we can hear you. Welcome, Commissioner, and thank you for making it in 2D. Here you are. Next time, hopefully, we'll be able to do this in person, but still, thank you very much for sticking to your commitment. I would just jump right in with the news of the week, if you agree. So in recent days, we've seen huge market volatility following the collapse of 2 banks in the US, Credit Suisse needing rescue, and it feels a little bit like Judgment Day for our banking regulation. So I would like to ask you, what's your judgment on whether it will hold, should this balloon, and what would happen in the EU differently from what happened in Switzerland?
First of all, good morning, and happy to be with you, despite I was not able to make it in Paris. But, well, indeed, these two crises that were in two completely different banks and had completely different routes were, of course, in any way connected by a general environment of volatility, which is the environment we are in. So in this environment, of course, it's very difficult to predict what will happen, but overall, I think we can be reassured by the fact that the European banking system is stronger than it has been, is safe, robust. If we compare our rules with other jurisdictions, I think that our banks were strongly stress tested. We have, as you know, the Basel standards for a huge number of banks, which was not the case, for example, in US. So I think we have all the possible reassurance, despite volatility, that we are in a safe environment, which doesn't mean, of course, that we can ignore this volatility. As we always say, we closely monitor the situation. But beyond this, my point is, Paola, that we have two challenges ahead of us. One is, do we need further steps on regulation? And the second challenge is, how do we deal with monetary policy and fiscal policy, so the more general challenges that this new situation is bringing to us.
Well, speaking of that, last June, the Euro area finance ministers tasked the Commission to come forward with proposals on strengthening the banking union, proposals on tightening rules for bailouts of mid-sized banks, for instance, which sounds very topical at the moment. But these proposals were delayed for months. They were due to come out in December and then in March, and we still don't know when are they coming. So are we waiting for a full market meltdown, or will these proposals see the light of day anytime in the future?
Well, let me say, first of all, that from a supervisory point of view, we are not in a vacuum. We have a strong regulation in Europe, and we are, I think, supervising our banking system in a very effective way, and maybe in one of the more effective way in the world. So, because we shouldn't, I think, describe the situation as, well, we have a void, we have to intervene tomorrow, etc. What happened, to be honest, was that we tried for a certain number of years to have a substantial agreement on the banking union, and we were not able to find an agreement among finance ministers. And then on part of this file, honestly, not the bigger part of this file, the biggest, we tasked the Commission to come with proposals on the scheme for crisis management. The Commission will do it in the second quarter of this year. But please do not forget the fact that we still have some substantial files of the banking union which need a progress. In my view, we should not give the message, well, we have to move now to over-regulate, I don't know what, because we have a good framework. We can improve it with the proposal of the Commission. And the point is, will we be able to try to address the big files of the banking union that are not yet solved? This is a question mark also, perhaps, for the meeting of the European Council, which will take place in 1 hour here in Brussels.
Do you believe that there is new impetus, given the financial market turmoil, to get a stronger mandate from leaders and ministers on completing the third pillar of the banking union, the European Deposit Insurance Scheme?
Well, I think that this is needed. I hope that a message will come. It is not, of course, what was worked for this European Council, because works are going on since weeks, and the emergency happened last week. But I'm sure that this issue will be addressed. And for finance ministers, the need to try to reopen this file is there if there is goodwill from everyone, because we know how different are positions among member states.
Thank you. You touched upon something earlier. You mentioned that this obviously has implications for monetary and fiscal policy. We saw last night that the Federal Reserve decided to keep hiking, even though it signaled that it might have to slow down in the future. Today is the turn of the Bank of England, of the Swiss National Bank. Last week, the ECB also kept on its hiking path. So is there a risk that we're pushing the economy towards a slowdown? One, and secondly, what therefore should finance ministers do, the people who control the purse, to help in this situation?
Well, of course, we need a balance, which is not easy. We had, as I frequently say, we had a love story between monetary and fiscal policy during the pandemic. It was clear message, all working in the same direction, support the economy, expansionary fiscal policies, and extraordinary purchase program from the ECB. In this new environment, which is the environment high inflation, of course, we have to have a very strong cooperation. I think the ECB wisely decided to confirm the increase of 50 basic points, but at the same time wisely announced that further decision will be taken, as they say, data dependent, which means that they are not giving a forward guidance, but they are assessing the situation in its evolution. Why? Because, of course, we know that inflation is declining, but core inflation is still persisting, and we have to monitor how the possible second round effects of inflation coming from spirals of wages and prices, which at the moment are not so substantial in the European economy. Will they evolve? We will see. As far as our fiscal policy is concerned, I think we have to avoid universal spending and support due to the energy costs, which was maybe inevitable in last autumn, but is no more inevitable in this spring. So we have to work to make all these measures more selective. And I think there is a room of maneuver to make them more selective. And at the same time, we have to use our common programs, especially for countries with limited fiscal space, because overall, the possibility to avoid recession is clearly there. We are not entering into recession now. And the possibility to have a growth at decent level, not far from 1%, is possible this year. But it depends on this difficult balance, because we can't undermine monetary policy with too expansionary fiscal stance. So this is a more difficult cooperation than the love story that we had, but even more necessary than it has been.
There is some couple maintenance to do then. Let's switch topic and talk about the economic governance review. The Commission last November presented its orientations or its ideas on how it intends to make sure that fiscal rules to keep debts and deficits in check are fit for the post-pandemic era. Finance ministers last week, however, tasked the Commission to continue to engage with capitals before making proposals. Perhaps a less enthusiastic tone that you might have hoped for. EU leaders later today are set to repeat just as much. My question to you is, what are you essentially waiting for? Are you trying to pre-cook an agreement before you present anything?
Well, of course, we have a lot of engagement with member states at all levels. Our services answer to maybe more than 300 written questions coming from member states, and rightly so, because there is a lot of details that have to be understood. But what is clear is that we have a broad convergence on several main aspects of our proposals. First, that debt reduction need to be more gradual and more differentiated among countries. Second, that we need a midterm approach, not only a year-by-year approach. Third, that if we give to member states stronger ownership of the proposals of their midterm fiscal plans, we can pretend also stronger enforcement of these rules. And finally, we will try adopting a net expenditure rule to have a simpler mechanism also for the public opinion to understand how the fiscal trajectories are going. I think there is an overall convergence on these principles, but a lot of further work to understand different opinions of member states, especially on two issues. First, how do we combine this differentiation among member states with common benchmarks, common standards? And this concern was particularly expressed by some member states, including Germany, and we are discussing about this. On the other side, we have member states asking for clarity or for more on how we incentivize investments in this framework. As you know, we incentivize investments not with a classical golden rule, but with a mechanism that allows member states that are including strategic investments in their plans to have a even more gradual path of debt reduction. So you are not gaining a different accounting method, you are gaining time with this method. But discussion is also open on which are the strategic investments, and several member states ask for stronger commitment for investment. So what we are doing, we are continuing this conversation with member states, trying to reduce differences. Of course, when we will come in the coming weeks with our legislative proposals, as always, we will not have solved everything. We will still need, in the process of discussion with the Council and with the Parliament, to adjust several things, but our effort is to reduce the differences before presenting in the coming weeks our legislative proposals.
Thank you. You mentioned one of the areas of disagreement, this so-called common quantitative benchmark, which Germany has requested. So if I understand it correctly, when I ask Germany's finance minister, they also are not super clear on what they mean by that, but it's some reassurance that that will decline over the timeline of the national path for debt reduction. Now, this is a question of moral hazard. This is a word that's been thrown around a lot, but essentially it's how do we ensure that some countries are not on the hook for other countries' debt eventually. And how exactly do you want to ensure that debts will go down without going back to a one-size-fits-all rule? How can you square that circle?
Well, this is exactly one of the issues we are now addressing. So it's not easy for me to give you an answer, not for reason of confidentiality, but because this is exactly a process we are discussing upon. What is clear is that we are all aware of the fact that the so-called rule of the debt that we have, our actual rules, reducing 1/20 per year towards the target of 60% of the debt, is no more effective and implemented. This was recognized also by the German position papers a few months ago. So we all are aware of the fact that, well, the existing rules had some important elements. For example, this 3% threshold for deficit to GDP that we will keep. Of course, we are not discussing the 60% benchmark in the treaties, but the path needs to be more gradual. And at the same time, I think we should recognize two things that are very clear. First, since the treaties were signed, the overall level of debt increased, despite rules very ambitious in reduction of the debt. You know that the famous 60% was the average debt of the 12 countries signed the treaties. It was not a scientific benchmark. Now these countries has a debt of more than 80%. So this is how things went in the last 15, 20 years. I think if we are more differentiated, more gradual, but also more capable of enforcement, we will be more effective than we have been in recent times. I understand that this should not in any case send a message that we have fiscal policies a la carte, decided by each country in their own, negotiated with the Commission without any common reference. So this is why we are working to keep this differentiation and this ownership, but having a common reference.
And maybe you can help me make some news here, but do you have a timeline for the presentation of these proposals? And also, do you think that you will be able to close legislative work by end 2023 as requested by finance ministers?
Well, of course, your 2 points are strictly connected. If we want to close the legislative work by the end of the year, as requested by the last ECOFIN we need to have this proposal in the table soon. Soon means matter of a certain number of weeks, not several months. This is obvious, and I think this is what the Commissioner is working to do.
Thank you, Commissioner.
We don't have yet an exact date, but I think you understood very well the overall time frame. There is no way to reach an agreement by the end of the year if we are not presenting in the coming 5 to 10 weeks this proposal.
Thanks so much. Switching tack again, the Recovery and Resilience Fund. This year is the make it or break it year for this first joint debt experiment at this scale in Europe. You expect to disburse 266 billion, which is over a third of all funds. But we had a story out yesterday saying that some countries are falling behind their payment schedule, which was perhaps a little bit optimistic. There's objective reasons why they cannot implement at the rhythm that they had given themselves, one of them being inflation, which is inflating cost. Some countries have changed governments, and these new governments are seeking changes to the plans penned by their predecessors. So we're nearly halfway through its lifetime, but we're running a little bit behind. I calculated that you're missing 27.5 billion of payment requests to date. How concerned are you about these delays and countries getting stuck? And do you think, therefore, that the deadline for the recovery fund, which is currently 2026, and let's remind the audience, if countries don't receive money by then, it simply won't be paid out, should be extended?
Well, I think you gave a realistic picture, meaning that we, until now, we disbursed 144 billion, maybe 146 now, have been the last two decisions for Czechia and Slovakia. We are not, I think, having significant delays in the sense that we don't have countries that are openly in difficulty with the timing of all these targets and milestones, etc. But we have some countries with delay, and we have to work on it. The Commission is, how to say it, flexible in our attitude, but of course very committed to fully respect what our regulations are. This means that we know very well that there are some objective circumstances, from inflation to the lack of some components to other difficulties that need to be addressed. We already updated plans for 3 countries, Luxembourg, Finland, and Germany. And these updates are coming in these days. We use the definition of objective circumstances to be very flexible with member states, but we need, of course, that this flexibility is arguing the reasons why countries are asking to move their plans to reduce some of the amounts of plans for investments, not for reforms. These conversations are going on. For some countries is very big debate, of course, just to mention Spain, where if you put together their requests for loans, Repower EU, the new allocation of grants that Spain received, you have a sort of addendum to their plans, which is around 80 or 90 billion, which is, of course, huge. So the machine is moving. I am honestly overall satisfied. I don't think we should give the perspective of flexibility, but not the perspective of extending the deadline. Why? Because this deadline is enshrined in two big decisions taken by us. And one of these, the decision on the headroom to issue our common debt on financial market, was a decision with this deadline taken with the approval of all European parliaments. So you need to change it, not only unanimity in the European Council, but you need unanimous supports of all parliaments. I remember very well how long and difficult it was to have this unanimous support from parliaments, and we were during the pandemic. I suppose that this is very difficult. Of course, if there is a political decision in this direction, we are ready, but I don't think that this is realistic. So we should keep the idea and the target of end of 26. Of course, some countries are shifting part of the programs towards cohesion or other European funds, having a different deadline in 29. And this is something that we are not against.
Thank you. And finally, I would like to ask you about the topic of the day. I mean, the European Council is meeting in Brussels. That's the reasons partly you couldn't be here with us today. And one of the topics of discussion is how to maintain, enhance, and keep Europe competitive in the global order. One of the things that Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said in Davos was that this will be a two-step approach. We will have, on the one hand, a targeted temporary relaxation of state aid rules so that countries can match what the US, for instance, is doing. But on the other hand, we will also step up European funds. And she spoke of a European sovereignty fund. I would like to ask you, what should be the goal of this fund and how should it be financed?
Well, first, I think we should keep this two-step approach and not avoid the risk to lose one of the two steps. Of course, the first step was a decision in the exclusive competence of the Commission, so quite easy and rapid to take, the loosening of state aid rules. But we all know how this is not a real solution in itself alone. At the same time, we are working with existing funds. This should be, of course, not forgotten. We have our EU funds, and we will use the remaining loans of Next Generation EU, around between 100 and 150 billion of remaining loans in the new chapter that we call Repower EU, more connected to energy infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but apart from this, which is already important, I think the president stressed the need for what she called sovereignty fund, because we, I think, need to fund some clean tech, very advanced and ambitious programs, giving them a European scale and a European added value. I mean, in the conditions we were when the next generation EU funding was decided, it was inevitable a mechanism to allocate funds to member states. And also one of the pillars of this decision, which was solidarity, was bringing to this allocation through allocation keys to member states. But I think this is something that is not addressing all the competitiveness issues that we have. Of course, we have benchmarked a certain amount of the national funds of the recovery plans to be targeted for the green transition, the digital innovation, etc. But we need on certain leading projects a European dimension and a European common finance. I think if we accept this principle, then the discussion will come on how to finance it. Will it be something only based on loans or something stronger that would be needed based also on grants? Let me only stress conclusively one point. This is not the same thing that the RRF and Next Generation EU. I mean that we should not consider that the dimension of redistribution and solidarity that was clearly there is needed for all the possible future European common funding. If we have a European common project for clean hydrogen, telling the first thing coming in my mind, this is in the interest of all European countries. It's not a transfer from stronger to weaker economies. It's a common project. I think that if we want to be competitive, we need this European added value and this European scale for some projects. It cannot be a response only for each and every member state.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That brings us to a close for our interview. I wish you a good rest of your day. Grazie mille.
Grazie.
Buona giornata.
Thank you.
And thanks for the audience. I would like to just sum up quickly with the main points that we had raised. Essentially, we are potentially seeing a banking crisis in parts of the world, but in Europe we have strong rules. It remains yet to be seen whether they will be up to scratch if we have a banking failure here. In terms of the economic governance review, we're going to see proposals within the next few weeks, but some key points remain to be covered, including how to acquiesce demands from Germany that we will need to see debts going down over a reasonable time frame. On the Recovery and Resilience Funds, the Commissioner is confident that we are on track. There are some delays, but essentially we can work on them. And on the Sovereignty Fund, I would like to say, let's see if he gets to have his way, to have common European financing. We will see that in June when the Commission makes proposals. Thank you all. I would like to invite you to remain seated because the next session will begin shortly, and it will be my colleague, Johanna Trick, who is European economics correspondent, to lead the discussion called Balancing the Books, What's the Best Approach to Tackle Inflation? Thank you, that's all from me.